Stories from Foster Care is brought to you by the Irish Foster Care Association in association with the Department of Children, Disability and Equality. I'm Andrew Murphy, and on this episode of Stories from Foster Care, I'm talking to Tristan Casson-Rennie, CEO, and Scott Casson-Rennie, Director of Operations at FASD Ireland. Drawing from their lived experience as foster carers, they set out to raise awareness of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder.
We don't have any framework of support for people who live with a diagnosis or who live currently with FASD but don't have a diagnosis. And we know that in Ireland today, the prevalence is estimated to be up to 7.4% of population. So that's 381,000 people. But also we know that 1 in 10 babies is born with a form of FASD today in Ireland. Wow. We have the second highest prevalence in the world, but we have no statutory guidelines of assessment or framework for support.
Passionately advocating for better understanding, shifts in policy and practice to support and accommodate people living with FASD in Ireland. Thank you, Scott and Tristan, for joining me this morning with Stories for Foster Care. And I know that you're both involved in FASD, Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. And I want to just thank you so much for your time this morning. I know you're both very, very, very busy. And I suppose, look, you come to this with two parts of your life that we'd like to ask you about and to share with us. And that's your fostering and your knowledge and expertise around that, and your work with FASD Ireland. So I was just wondering, fostering, how did that come about for you? How did that very unique door open for both of you?
I'm going to talk about the fostering piece.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, you're welcome. It did start a long, long time ago. It started in 2002. We were in Ireland. We'd moved over about 2 years before, I think, from the UK. And we just thought, well, Tris had a niece, and we were sometimes helping out with her. And we were like, oh, imagine if we could kind of look after children in some way, shape or form. We had foreign students from Spain and Italy coming to stay with us from the local language school. And we did really well with that as well. And we just found ourselves connecting with these kids that, were away from home and all that sort of stuff. So we thought, right, let's go and see if we could foster. So we approached the health board at the time, because I don't think it was called the HSE.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was called.
But
the Midwestern Health Board.
Yeah. We, contacted them, and we said, we're really interested in thinking about fostering. And then we got a phone call one day to say, actually, as a same-sex couple, we probably wouldn't be suitable to foster in Ireland. And we were like, oh, okay, well, what's the reason for that? And they just went, it would just be a lot of hassle. You'd have the Irish Sun on your doorstep, and it'd be scandalous that two men were fostering kids and stuff like that. So we're like, oh, right, okay. So we kind of left it at that. But what we did do in the meantime was we decided that this wasn't just going to be a flash in the pan thing just because somebody said no, because between the two of us, we're quite stubborn. But we decided that we were going to move back to the UK because the law had just changed where the same-sex couple could foster, adopt, etc. Moved back to the UK, settled after about a year, and then we decided to try again. And once again, we went to a fostering agency, and this time they actually sent a social worker out to sit and chat with us, which was lovely. She actually spent a couple of hours with us at the end, and then at the end she said, I'm not really sure you're going to be suitable for fostering, I'm afraid. And we were like, what do you mean? And we were quite offended by that, but then she went on to explain that she thought we'd be better as adoptive parents rather than foster carers.
Okay.
So that was our kind of first venture into it. And, we did go on to adopt, and, we adopted 2 kids and blah, blah, blah. But then we ventured back into fostering when they'd grown up as well. So, we're talking 10 years later, we were approached to take we were going through the fostering assessment process. We were still in the UK at this point, so we started to go through the fostering process again, and then by chance we were approached about a little boy who they wanted to fit into kind of our family dynamics longer term, which is how we ended up back into fostering, or properly into fostering, because we'd never actually really done fostering until that time. So that was 2014. And, using all the experience we'd learned from adoption, it was the same, but it was very, very different.
Scott, can I ask you, just in terms of the adoption versus fostering, did you get a sense, or did you get an explanation as to why that would have been different? As in, they welcomed you in for adoption but not for fostering. Was that explained to you, or did you get a better understanding of that?
Yeah, we did. I mean, they basically said that they didn't think that we'd be very good at, kind of allowing the child to leave, maybe to go back to their biological parents, or to move on to maybe adoption or other form of permanence. I mean, don't get me wrong, the social worker was amazing. I mean, sadly she passed away a couple of years ago, but she was actually our adoption social worker through a different agency, because she was an independent. But when we sat and chatted to her about it, she was very clear that it wasn't about her ability to foster, it was about our ability to kind of be resilient enough to say, actually, that child has been with you for, I don't know, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, but actually they're now in a position where they're going to move on to some form of long-term care, whether that was biological family or kinship or adoption, however that looked. So it wasn't just a case of you're not going to be great at it. I mean, obviously we would have been great at it. It's just the fact that she was very clear that there would be kind of I guess a resilience piece for us that maybe at that point we wouldn't have been able for. I mean, we were a lot younger as well, and we'd never kind of ventured into fostering in that stage. But definitely, I think as well they were trying to recruit same-sex adoptive parents at that point as well, and she maybe saw the opportunity that that's actually what would have suited us more.
So times have changed, of course, and we have same-sex couples now, and we're really looking for same-sex couples all the time. So when did that kind of change then? And so what in Ireland for you guys, and what happened around that? Did you have was there a moment where that kind of was clearer that was going to happen, or was it just pure chance?
I think I think obviously the law changing about same-sex marriage in Ireland was probably one of the biggest things, just past 10 years now. And I think that, Ireland is a very progressive country in a lot of ways. We accept people a lot easier, especially if it's like, this is going to sound really strange, but if a law changes and it says this is how it is, and the majority of people are like, oh, okay, that's how it is now, so we just get on with it, kind of thing. We live on the west coast of Ireland, well, as close to the west coast of Ireland as you possibly can and have done off and on since 2000. We have never once experienced anything even near homophobia to our faces anyway.
That's great.
Different from what people say behind your back, but we have never experienced that. When we lived here, again, when we were younger, so 2000s, we were quite ignorant to politics, religion, etc. Whereas now we've this time around we've lived here nearly 10 years, but we're very aware of things like that. Maybe our awareness has been raised by doing what we do now with FASD Ireland and having children here as well, because when you have children and they go to school here, you then kind of start to understand and learn the dynamics of race, religion, ethnicity. Ireland has changed since since 2003 to a point where we didn't really recognize it when we came back. But for the most part, we have never experienced anything except acceptance here from everybody so far. Touch wood,
It's brilliant, isn't it?
Nearly 30 years now, we've never had any issues.
It's great.
That,
Great to hear that, Scott. It's really good endorsement of the west of Ireland and Ireland in general. It's great, really, really, yeah. Well, look, it's down to you as well, and how you introduced and how you, put yourselves into the community and had children and all that kind of stuff. So it's down to that sort of building relationships,
and that's
isn't
the
it?
thing. Yeah, I think as well, we've got 3 kids and also a granddaughter and a grandson on the way. But I think for us, we couldn't have kids and not advocate for ourselves, and advocate for them if we couldn't advocate for ourselves. So I think, there was a turning point where, we both just could no longer come out to people every day. And what I mean by that is, having a job maybe where you weren't honest with people for the first couple of months, and then all of a sudden they'd say, oh, well, what does your wife or your girlfriend do? And you go, well, actually, I don't have a wife or a girlfriend. So it was that kind of approach that we were very much, we just have to be open and honest from the off. And, there was a turning point with that, started to use social media under a pseudonym and, all those kinds of things to keep keep the privacy of our kids and stuff like that. But equally, there was, that point where we were just like, well, actually, there's no, we can't hide it because we don't want the boys to hide it, and they've never hidden it either. But because of that, they've never had any problems.
That's brilliant.
In terms of explaining to their friends that they've got gay parents, and that's just the way it is. They're very matter of fact about it. So
the younger people are a lot more accepting, aren't they? And they're very nonchalant about it, which is brilliant. I still know that there's definitely bullying and still the things go on, but it's not in the same, I suppose, maybe as people can talk about it at least, in a different way. Coming out isn't a one-off event, right? So that you've really had to manage that, as foster carers.
Yeah, and the thing is, they have to come out every day.
Yeah,
they have to come out and say, well, because what do your parents do? Or well, number one, I'm adopted, and secondly, I've got gay parents. So it's like for them as well. We've had to give them the confidence where they can actually say, if they wanted to. The one thing I will say is, I wouldn't say they're hard nuts, but if anybody ever did try and say something, they would be very quick to react because they've got that confidence instilled in them to be able to say, actually, you're talking rubbish there. They might not word it like that. There might be a few expletives in it, but they'd be very confident in being able to say, actually, I don't agree with you, and all those kinds of things that you maybe think are, they're just in your head kind of thing, rather than.
And Scott, that's obviously come from yourself and Tristan building that self-confidence with the children, and any kind of insights or anything there or moments that you can think of that helped that, or people maybe even that helped that.
I think family helps, obviously. You can't do very much without a support network, no matter what that looks like. And support networks can, when the going gets tough, you can see the support networks kind of disappear a little bit, maybe. But family definitely helped, and I think that kind of that acceptance from our families in terms of what we were doing from the off, they were very kind of open to it. They were very supportive of it, and I think there was more of an excitement about the fact that we were going to have children, because they didn't think it was possible. That was one of the things probably when both of us came out. I mean, Tris is a lot older. I mean, Tris is a little bit older than me, so he came out before me.
Tristan, defend yourself.
But I think that time has changed since that happened, and I think perhaps I'm not casting aspersions on Tris's family, but I think for Tris's family, it's more about the fact that he would never provide them with grandchildren, kind of thing. My parents weren't quite so like that. They were more, I'm from rural Scottish where homophobia was rife in the 80s and 90s. So it was more about the fact that I was just gay. It doesn't matter how my life was going to turn out. But I think specifically there was kind of that that thing about you'll never give us kids, and then obviously we've gone on to do that. But school. The school were amazingly supportive. And again, schools, every school is different. Every school makeup is different. You've still got quite elements of religion, even though perhaps it's not supposed to be in schools in Ireland and stuff like that. So I think it just depends on what kind of school you're able to select. But, our head teacher that we had in one of the schools that in fact, even the one here in Ennis, very supportive of us. Parents could see that we're making a difference in these people's lives, and just supporting us and supporting our message, which then instills the confidence into our children. And it's not about them, it's not about parents going in and kind of making a mark for themselves, as one of our children politely told us a couple of times, that we were only doing it for our own gain. No, we're really not. We're doing it so that you've got the kind of the path to success and the confidence to be able to do it as well.
And Scott, you've talked there about the changes in Irish society, or maybe just the some of the acceptances that have happened in Ireland. And alongside that, I suppose I've seen anyway, I've been working in fostering for a while now, and there's been a few changes in fostering as well. What do you feel the current state of fostering is? What's your sense of it at the moment? Is there a hope in the fostering field at the moment for people? Yeah.
Here we go. Do you know what I find really interesting? Because I'm not going to promote it, but I have a podcast as well on adoption and fostering.
Okay.
And we obviously cover bits of adoption and fostering within that podcast. And what I think is really interesting is that fostering looks the same across the globe.
Mm-hmm.
Where we've got a shortage of foster carers. Recruitment is really terrible at the minute. We've got foster carers leaving the system. And, my view on that is that the reason for that is the same in every country.
Okay.
It's the lack of support coming from governments and I mean, don't get me wrong, in terms of what support is available, it's very different in each country. So that looks different everywhere, but in terms of the reasons, we speak to people who are in America who are involved in the foster care system there. America's very different to Ireland and the UK, but certainly the kind of people are leaving fostering disillusioned by it because of the lack of supports, which is why, when you've got people like the Irish Foster Care Association and supportive agencies that are independent, they're the ones that I think are the kind of, they're the ones that are making the difference, because they're the ones that are really focusing in on, the supports that are needed. Because a child can go into foster care, but it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't mean that everything's going to be all right for that child. Yes, they're safe and they're secure, but they're going to have trauma. They're going to have potential additional kind of conditions, including FASD or ADHD or autism. But I think that it is the same the world over, and I have seen that pattern, because obviously dealing with fostering in different countries, or not dealing with it, but speaking to people about fostering in different countries, there's absolutely the same thing is going on, where we're struggling to get foster carers. I think that the future of foster care is that's going to be something that I think is going to be around for forevermore, because I don't think we can get away from this kind of need for it. Unfortunately, I do think that lack of early supports result in a child being, not every child, because obviously there are other reasons why children might come into the care system, but certainly lack of supports from early on has a contributing factor to the need for foster carers. And as we have things like financial crises, all those kinds of things that can contribute to literally a family overnight going, wow, okay, how do we do this? We don't know how to do this anymore. Those kinds of things have an impact.
I know that your lives and where it has moved to and where you're currently at is your work, your experience of fostering, and your work in setting up FASD Ireland. It's interwoven, it's interlinked, it's interlocked in lots of ways. One wouldn't have happened without the other, the FASD wouldn't have happened without the fostering journey. And I was just wondering, how did it start, or what went on? I mean, Tristan, I'm going to bring you in here if I can. I mean, we might think, like, where did this emerge from, this sort of where you're currently at, which is, it seems like you have set up a really committed, passionate agency to try and get this message out there. Where did it all start for you?
Well, it started one night at around 9 o'clock, where I just sat thinking about the world and my frustrations as a parent of two children that live with FASD. And I think I frightened Scott when I jumped off the sofa and said, it's now or never. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I have to set up an organization and we're going to call it FASD Ireland. And I have no clue how I'm going to do this. And it was on the International Awareness, FASD Awareness Day, the 9th of September in 2021. And I went through into my study and I shut the door and I said, I'm going to make a video. I'm going to announce to the world that FASD Ireland is here. And I made the video, and Scott was standing the other side of the door, and he said to me, you've got to re-record that. You sounded so grumpy.
Okay.
Try smiling. Try smiling while you're reading it. The video actually is still on our website. Okay. It's one of the earliest. It's in the archive, but it's there.
Okay.
And I look back on it, and everything I said on that video still stands today. Some of the ministerial names have changed, moved on, but the key players are still in and around the political arena, and we're still working with them today and trying to move the conversation forward. But Yeah, that's how it started, and it was just towards the end of COVID. I was incredibly frustrated at the lack of support for my family,
Hmm.
both us as parents and our children. I went to one of our deputy's surgeries that he was holding under a tree in our village in the pouring rain, and he said, the government aren't very good at listening to parents, so set up an organization and then you might get an audience. And
Okay.
and I think he eats those words every week when I'm
Okay.
contacting him saying, "Come on, I need some more help." But no, he's an ardent supporter of our
Okay.
work and very vocal in Leinster House about the work that we do, and we're
Okay.
ever grateful for the support that we get from
Excellent.
that particular deputy.
That's great. And Tristan, can you just, for some of our listeners, will maybe be familiar with it and others may not and will have heard about it but won't have a huge understanding of it. And I might be one of those people actually. But could you tell us what is FASD?
So, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is lifelong irreversible brain damage that's caused by prenatal alcohol exposure. And both parents have a shared responsibility to prevent the risk of FASD in their baby.
Hmm.
So, let me start by saying that no parent ever sets out to harm their child.
Absolutely.
And so, a lot of the responsibility for the prevention of FASD lies jointly with the alcohol industry and with the government in terms of public health awareness, education, and knowledge. I'll just break it down a bit. So essentially, a woman should not consume any drink containing alcohol immediately prior to conception or at any point through the 9 months of pregnancy. So
Okay.
that's any single drink.
Okay.
We're not talking about alcoholism here. We're just talking about a drink containing alcohol. So
Okay.
that's the 9 month rule essentially for a woman. For a man, though, it gets a little bit more complicated. So the research is fairly recent. In the last 2 years, we've started to build a picture through science of the man's responsibility. So a man should not drink any drink containing alcohol in the 9 weeks. So not 9 months, but 9 weeks prior to
Okay.
conception. And that's because we know that the alcohol causes epigenetic changes to the cellular structure of the sperm, and it will essentially predispose the egg to the vulnerability of alcohol should the mum then drink a glass or a drink containing alcohol in the 9 months of pregnancy. So it makes the egg a little bit more vulnerable. Secondly, it can cause the offspring to display symptoms consistent with FASD, but they wouldn't necessarily have FASD, but they will have symptoms consistent with the condition.
Okay.
And then thirdly, and probably but the more concerning, is that their offspring, when they reach the age of 40, will be vulnerable to cardiovascular, renal, inflammatory,
Okay.
and diabetic challenges. And that probably helps to explain why we have such a high level of illness in society in Ireland over the age of 40.
Okay.
And
That's
that
very
probably is the
interesting.
most scary reason for men to essentially avoid drinking any alcohol
Okay.
in the 9 weeks before conception, but importantly, there to pre-plan pregnancy.
So that's a really important public health message in and of itself. Just
It is, and
that people don't
it's one
know
you'll
that.
hear. It's one you'll hear from us,
Yeah.
but it's not sadly one you'll hear from the HSC or government.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Wow.
You're listening to the Stories from Foster Care podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Tristan, in terms of where are we currently at in relation to FASD in Ireland? Are we still stuck in a trying to make it a treatment model, a recovery model, or are we moving into understanding that this is, as you said, a lifelong, debilitating diagnosis that people are living with? Where are we at with that?
We are the outlier in the world. As a country, we still don't recognise FASD as a disability.
Okay.
In fact, Minister Hildegard Naughton went on record on the 26th of March last year and stated, at this time, Ireland does not recognise FASD as a disability. So we are very much an outlier. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that currently the HSE doesn't have a clinical lead for FASD. It means that we have no assessment or diagnostic pathway ratified or agreed in the country, so no benchmarking for clinicians. We don't train our clinicians about FASD. So lots of times parents and carers will be hearing things like, I'm sorry, but your child doesn't meet criteria for referral to CAMS or for CDNT. And finally, and really importantly, we don't have any framework of support for people who live with a diagnosis or who live currently with FASD but don't have a diagnosis. And we know that in Ireland today, the prevalence is estimated to be up to 7.4% of population. So that's 381,000 people. But also we know that 1 in 10 babies is born with a form of FASD today in Ireland. Wow. We have the second highest prevalence in the world, but we have no statutory guidelines of assessment or framework for support.
That's a very stark statistic, isn't it?
It is.
And what's that comparable to, Tristan, in terms of, so we were to take another population like, I don't know, maybe people with autism or something like this, or what would we be looking at in terms of population size or comparable groups?
The globally recognized statistic for people living with autism is 1.15% of population.
Okay.
So when we then look at the global prevalence of FASD, that's 0.8%. So Ireland has 10 times the global level of prevalence of FASD, or put another way, somewhere in the region of 7 times the number of people diagnosed with autism in Ireland. It's a huge number, and FASD is more prevalent than autism, Down syndrome, and cerebral palsy combined. It's a huge number.
Wow. And so we could take it then that without diagnosis, without the scaffolding around it, there's so many people we know, people we care about, people we love maybe, who are living with some maybe impact.
Yes, everybody who lives in Ireland today will know at least one person who lives with FASD. It's just that they may not have that diagnosis. They may have a diagnosis of any one of the 428 comorbid conditions associated with FASD, but they will not have a primary diagnosis of FASD. And that's simply because the assessments are not being carried out to identify if FASD features for that person. And I say person because we don't grow out of FASD. It's lifelong. So essentially primary care are not asking the questions. And then if somebody, say, who is an adult is going along for an assessment, perhaps for ADHD, they're not being asked the questions either.
Okay. So is that part of, or this, I suppose, maybe underlying knowledge or awareness or acceptance that this is a reality for Irish society? Is there a reluctance then? Are we afraid of opening the floodgates then? Is there something going on there that if we were to acknowledge it, that we'd have this huge onslaught of people needing supports and diagnosis?
I think that's the myth that's being peddled around government and by government because of their ignorance of the condition. What we know and what we recognize is that many of these people are already known by the agencies that exist to provide supports. It's just that they're being supported for the wrong condition. And that's a bleed on the public purse. And if we were just to get our act together and recognize FASD, we know that we could save the public purse 9 billion euros a year.
Okay, so people are accessing mental health services, criminal justice services, social services, but in the wrong or in misdirected, or it's just not right for them, yeah?
Well, it's absolutely the wrong fit. They don't have the correct diagnosis, so there can be some risk associated with that, where if we have a young person who perhaps has a diagnosis of ADHD, but really that's a secondary diagnosis to FASD being a primary cause.
Okay.
Today, they're getting lots and lots of psychotropic drug therapy to help with their ADHD, but we know that that's not consistent with the right way in how to support somebody who lives with primary FASD. And what we see as a result of that is an escalation in things like child-on-parent violence in the home or aggression in schools, and there's lots of reports of that happening. And that's simply because the healthcare system, CAMs, CDNTs, perhaps pediatricians, they're prescribing medication that isn't consistent with what would be a primary FASD diagnosis.
Okay. Look, it's really, really revealing. I'm kind of lost for words in terms of those statistics and what it means for us as a society. And then looking at that, I suppose the natural assumption might be, or is it, that we'll have a higher prevalence within children who are in out-of-home care due to their history of parents who maybe had adversities and trauma and alcohol use. Do we know anything about that, Tristan, Scott? Do we have any sense of that?
We do from global numbers, and Ireland would be fairly consistent as one of the world players, I suppose, in terms of the numbers of children that are being taken into care or who are living with care experience. So the current estimate is that around a third, so 33% of children living in the care system in Ireland will be living with FASD. And remember this, because we often see trauma as what has happened to a child from when they set foot on the planet. So when they're living in birth families or when they're even removed from birth families, that's traumatic. But we forget that trauma for a child with FASD starts in utero, because alcohol is a teratogen. It crosses the placenta. The developing fetus doesn't have a kidney or liver to process that alcohol, that poison, and the only organ developed sufficiently enough to process alcohol is the brain. And so for that developing fetus, that's immensely traumatic. So a young person with FASD has experienced trauma from when they were the size of a pinhead, and not from just when they set foot on the planet.
Okay. Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it, to take on you've really opened and revealed a huge a leviathan of work that needs to be done here, really. I really appreciate it. But in terms of in terms of caring for and looking after these children, and many of our listeners, and most of our listeners most likely will maybe had an experience based on those statistics that you've shared. So what's that? So how do we move and change into that place of understanding that these are lifelong experiences for these children, that maybe that some of the things, that the expectations that we have of them, that the way that we parent them might need to be adjusted and accommodated. So that conversation has to happen. So what are the typical kind of signs, symptoms, experiences that young people or children are showing or demonstrating in the home?
So there are many of them. No child is the same, but what I can tell you is some of the consistent challenges that we face in the home will be around memory function. So short-term memory is impacted. If you send a child down to the shop to get some things for you, make sure you write it down and put it on a list, because they're not going to remember if you give them a list of half a dozen things. They might just get to the shop and then not realize why they're there.
Okay.
So the short-term memory is severely impacted. Their sleep will be impacted. They might be able to achieve between 3 and 4 hours of sleep a night. It's not because they're refusing to go to sleep, which is often the message we hear. It's that they simply can't. Their body isn't geared up to overcome the volume of cortisol hormone in their body. They're not making enough melatonin, and unfortunately, you need a referral to a pediatrician or CAMS to be able to obtain melatonin in Ireland. There's a disconnect there. So sleep will be an issue. And of course, you know yourself, if you're not getting the sleep you require, then being able to work for, say, a 6 or 7 hour day in school becomes really challenging. Because of the lack of sleep, we know attention and focus is impacted. They may even have a comorbid of ADHD, so they might be wriggling. We see in our teenage cohort evidence like having a floordrobe rather than using the traditional wardrobe. I've always said to parents, please don't take on that challenge of demanding them to clean their bedroom. That will be your task to do once a week, every week, maybe until they're 30 or beyond. And it's simply because it's an overwhelming exercise for them. It will become a battle at home, and you don't want it to become a battle, so please don't make it one. So there's lots of things that we get parents and carers to look out for when we're talking about FASD, but equally there's lots of very easy wins as long as people understand what it is they're dealing with here.
I've heard people talk about won't as opposed to can't, and that's something in your world, isn't it, that you're trying to support people to understand better. Tell me a little bit about that, Tristan.
So it's fairly well recognized that a person living with FASD will need around 22 seconds to process a simple instruction, and often as adults, as parents, carers, we interpret no as I'm not doing that, so oppositional or defiant. And it's neither. Actually, they're saying no because they just mean, no, I need some time to process what you're saying. Give me the time and I'll come back to you. And that's difficult for any adult, particularly teachers, to have the time to even allow that to happen. But in the home, parents and carers will be experiencing that too. From my own and Scott's background with our children, there was often altercations around shower time. We would say, can you go and have a shower? He'd come in from playing rugby, and being a boy of teenage years, he'd be smelly and sweaty. And we would want him to give us the clothes so we could get them washed and him to go up to a shower. And very often that would be met with a no or even a wall of silence. We didn't understand in the early years that actually he was processing that. What do I need to do to have a shower? Excuse me. So we then discovered we needed to afford him the time to process that so he could go and have the shower, but we didn't give him that time, and it would usually end up in an altercation, child on parent violence. The guards would be called because he'd have thrown a punch to one of us or something. So it can escalate rapidly in the home. And
I suppose you forget how many steps there are involved in having a shower. I know we all take it for granted. It's just whatever you do, but if you have to do something, get things, put them back, put them somewhere, it's probably exhausting maybe, is it?
Well,
it is.
I mean, as parents, I think what we found interesting was we're like, have you been in the shower? Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. And then it took us, probably over a year to work out that, yes, he'd had a shower, but he didn't realize he had to wash when he was in the shower. So he just let the water go over him. And to him, that was having a shower, which, literally or practically, he was right. He was having a shower, but he wasn't washing in the shower and stuff like that. And it was really difficult to for us to kind of get our heads around that to begin with. But then as you start to see, and I mean, I didn't want to butt in on what Tris was saying, but I think as parents, the way we parented our older two children, if you like, compared to how we did it when our youngest one came along as a foster child, the difference in our parenting style is like night and day. We were very kind of, we did that thing, I'm sure everybody does it, I'm never going to parent like my parents parented. We ended up parenting like our parents parented because that's what we knew. But by the time the younger one came along, we'd learned more, we understood, and to the point where, even the older two go, well, we would never have gotten away with that. Like, no, you wouldn't have done, but, we hold our hands up and say, yeah, sorry about that, but, that's just the way it was kind of thing. And it took us, and I think we were both at different stages as well as in our learning and our education as to what could make a difference, what could make an impact. And then it was trying different things. And, we use the NVR principles, so nonviolent resistance principles, where, you've got three baskets. You've got the basket, which is your main focus for this week, month, year, whatever. Then you've got your next basket, which you'll kind of dip into to try and solve some of the problems. Then you've got the basket that you're never going to solve, and so it's just a case of leaving it there. And then if one happens to pop into the second, so we worked on those principles, and actually it really worked for us, just one thing at a time for us as parents to try and support him with, to then see the difference and then go, actually, that's working. So I wonder if I apply that principle to this, is that going to work? And it did. Really worked for us, and
Okay.
it worked for him as well, to the point that, not overnight, but certainly there was a realization for him as well that actually, oh, okay, they're trying to help me. So,
Okay.
I'm going to stop doing that, or, however it works in his head.
So I suppose the natural way to encourage or to push children, or to say, if you're bad at maths or if you're bad at something, do more of that to get it. That's not going to work,
No.
right?
I mean,
That's going to be the
homework
opposite,
would,
right?
yeah, homework would be the prime example, especially for somebody who lives with FASD, because
Okay.
their short-term memory, they I mean, God, I remember when I was at school, like homework, hated it and could never do it. But someone with FASD is even less likely to remember the lesson that they've got the homework from. And we actually, every school that we've been engaged with for our own children, we have said, we will not be making them do homework.
Okay.
It's as simple as that, because actually what it did was it escalated in the house, in the home, where the arguments over doing the homework was the first challenge. And then once you got them sat down to do it, I don't know what this is. What is it? I've never seen this before. I've never done this before. And that can apply to a lot of children. But I think, for us, it was just a case of that first part was the escalation part. And we just decided very early on, okay, if they're going to do homework, they can do it at school in break time or
there's a really important mantra that we give to schools who come to us and want to be FASD aware, and it is that school is for schoolwork and home is for nurture.
Okay.
And there should never be a crossover. So with children with FASD, get them to do all of their schoolwork in school. If needs be, and homework is set because the curriculum doesn't allow with the time in the day, then put some resource class time in there for homework to remain at school.
Okay.
But when you send them home, remember that home is for nurturing, and that's it. Please don't undermine the relationship at home by introducing homework. And schools who want to be FASD aware, and we have a number of them now in the country, they have implemented that. It works really well, and whilst they may have had objections in the first instance, they've been able to work around it, and that's really good. So it can be done. It's just terrifying for some principals to think about it.
Okay. And how do we then? So some people will be thinking, oh, you're just rewarding bad behaviour, or children not trying hard enough, or practice makes perfect mentality. What do we say? So in your work with the school, with the educations, what are we telling them? What's the message we're telling them there?
Well, look, some research that came out of Trinity College in Dublin 2 years ago, it was carried out by Dr. Katie Tobin there, and she found that 1/4 of children living with FASD were actually falling out of education by the age of 14. So what we say is, look, the priority here for young people living with FASD is that they complete their school career in school. Whether they get any points for the leaving cert, whether they do any good in the junior cert, that's not the issue here for children with FASD. The issue is that they need to experience school, they need to stay at school, they need to learn how they fit in socially, and they need to build on their executive functioning so that at least we can prepare them for some semblance of independent living once they leave education. But for 1/4 of those children with FASD, we know they are falling out of education at the age of 14, and there's nothing for them at that point. And that's why we know certainly that around 1,700 of our prison population across the Irish prison system in Obistown are living with a form of FASD. It's because they're failing out and falling out of education at a very young age. And the pressure shouldn't be there. The pressure should be on, let's keep them in school.
Keep them in. Yeah, absolutely. What's hard now will pay off in the long run, isn't that it? Is just keeping that clear. This is about the child moving through those social and building connections with people and building relationships and having positive experiences rather than just learning, the focus being on learning. Yeah, no, it's a really, really important. I can imagine maybe supporting a child or looking after a child or caring for a child with FASD can be challenging.
I never had a white hair on my face until our youngest arrived. It's hard work. It's a lifelong piece of work. And look, I'll share with you one of the early interventions I did when I did some contract work with Tuzla, was that I met a foster couple who had wanted to talk to somebody who knew something about FASD for a long, long time, many, many years, and they'd never been afforded the opportunity. But the social worker had connected with us, and I'd gone along. And they said to me, we have one question. How long do we have to provide this type of support to our child, who we love and is part of our family? And I said to them, it's lifelong. It's a lifelong commitment. And that was what they wanted to hear. They'd been told, once your child is 18, all the supports are going to fall away and they can go off into the sunshine and live their life independently. They'd never been told the truth. And they wanted to hear from another parent what the truth actually looked like. And I said, in the main, you're looking at somewhere between 25 and 30 before they are in a position where they can have that level of independence, where they can perhaps live in a supported living place away from your home. But they will still need that external brain to be doing and guiding them and doing tasks for them. And that's what they wanted to hear. So, anybody listening today who thinks they might have a foster child that lives with FASD or has a child with a diagnosis of FASD, and there are a few up and down the country with a diagnosis, your commitment to your child is going to be there forever. It's not going to change. And it's not a condition they grow out of, but it is a condition where they grow into independence as they get older. We do really well essentially reinforcing executive functioning by having regular inputs, but also we know that the ability to learn improves with age. The ability to assess action and a consequence improves with age. So it's a lifelong commitment.
Okay. And in terms of diagnosis, you said there's a few. How do you go about that? How do you start that process? So if you're a foster carer, if you're a professional or you're a residential worker, and you think this is this child's profile, how do you go about that?
Well, there's a couple of questions we always ask people is, in Ireland today, there's no official pathway for diagnosis through the HSE for the first instance. So I would always ask, why do you need a diagnosis today? And usually the response is because I need help in education, or my child needs help in education. Well, the beauty of the system with the NCSE is that, of course, that's needs-based. So assessments are based on need. And so you don't need a diagnosis to get the support through the NCSE. I know that's out for question, and people's living experience of that isn't quite so cut and dry. But nevertheless, if you believe that your child needs help and support in school, then the application goes through the school to the NCSE, and it's based on their needs being met. But on the flip side of that, of course, we would urge parents and carers to try to get a diagnosis. And we have just opened up a pathway through Tuzla for any child who is expected or suspected of living with a form of FASD. So a referral can be requested to the social worker. They can make a request for funding, and there is a clinic in South County Dublin called the Treehouse Practice, and they are providing assessments for Tuzla and funded by Tuzla. Now, there's going to be a huge list and queue and waiting, but nevertheless, that is an option now that's become available, and it's only available through your social worker. You cannot go to the clinic directly. You will be refused. So you do need to ask your social worker for that referral and expect a long wait. Okay.
And Tristan, I've heard people talk about facial features, so I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. Is that one of the myths involved in getting a diagnosis?
It's not a myth. So when I said a form of FASD, there's essentially 4 different conditions under the umbrella of FASD, and one of those is called Fetal Alcohol Syndrome. It affects around 10% of the FASD population,
Okay.
and that has visual facial features, so facial dysmorphia effectively. It's caused by the alcohol changing the structure of the facial features as the fetus is developing. There's a number of different facial features to look for, but the beauty of FAS is, of course, you can see it at birth. Now, we know that our HSE are seeing facial features at birth in a great number of cases. They are noting them, but they are sending the numbers to Europe. They are not telling birth families. And that is disastrous for all of those people, all of those children, all of those families. We're aware from talking to pediatricians that they have desperately tried to get FAS noted on the child's birth records, and they are being met with resistance by the HSE to do so. I have no idea why that's the case.
Okay.
I think it's a shocking affair. I think that we really need to understand why that's happening, that we're telling European Union officials the numbers of babies born with FAS, but we're not telling birth families. And people are starting then to recognize that the child has FAS as they're coming across our website. And if you want to check those facial features out, there is a page on our website under resources and health where we have emphasized what those facial features look like. But that comes with a caution. The child or person must have at least 3 of these facial features to even raise a flag for FAS.
Okay. And shame and personal history and choices that maybe people have had or experiences they've had as parents, becoming pregnant and getting pregnant, obviously that's going to be very difficult for people to accept and to understand. We have to have a conversation about that, and how do we support people to talk about their alcohol use? That has to become part of the knowledge around children, and we probably don't have that, especially for children who've come into care later on.
Yeah, look, I set out when I was talking and said no parent ever sets out to harm their baby. You can't have shame or blame if the country doesn't know what I shared with you about the ways in which we can remove the risk of FASD. We have to have a public health campaign in this country highlighting the risks of prenatal alcohol exposure at men and women. It has to be across both share that responsibility. And until we have that campaign, until we have that education in our schools, until we are telling everybody so that they know about FASD, then there's no reason for any parent or carer to feel shame about their child living with FASD. And, our office here in Ennis, we have boxes of these things because people are coming to us, and the numbers of tears, the volume of tears being cried in this office by parents and carers is huge. Phone calls to our national hub often start where we hear the sound of a parent or carer crying on the phone, and we have to coax out of them what they want to talk about. It is a hugely distressing sector to work in, and I have a brilliant team here who are able to deal with those calls and provide that support and guidance to biological parents and foster parents who are learning about FASD for the first time.
Huge grief and loss around all of it, isn't there? Really and truly.
Absolutely.
There's so much information. I feel like we could come back another time and bring you back in, because I don't think we've even touched the sides of it in lots of ways. I've really, really enjoyed, or not enjoyed, I've been really, it's a hard thing to say I was enjoyed, but it's really revealing and educational. I'm really taken aback by all the information you've given me, Tristan and Scott. Look, in closing, you guys are, you've achieved so much in a very short space of time. What's next? What do we need to be doing next? What would you, if you had Micheál Martin in front of you now, or what would you be saying?
I've had Micheál Martin in front of me, and he's thanked me profusely for the work that we do, but he sadly doesn't dip his hand in his finance pockets very much. That's just the state of the nation, I'm afraid. So what's next? Well, as an organisation, we continue to talk about our work. We teach in schools. We teach foster carers. Scott hates me using the word teach because we're not teachers, but we are sharing that education, that information, that science. We're trying to upskill as many people as we can. For us, the next big thing on the horizon is our conference on the 14th and 15th of May, and that's a really good place for people to learn about the latest information about FASD. It's really hard to share information electronically because people lead very fast-paced lives and they swipe left, right, whatever, but they don't read it all. But to come to our conference and listen to the experts for 2 solid days, but to be able to meet other parents and carers so you don't feel like a unicorn, that's really important and really powerful. And I would urge anybody who's listening to this to certainly mark those dates in their calendar.
And an opportunity to share and to regulate, because regulation is obviously key to all of this if you're caring for and looking after a young person who has the signs and symptoms of FASD. Guys, I can't thank you enough. I genuinely mean that. I know you're busy, you're involved in so much, and I know part of this, our work, we hear these stories, we hear of these children's lives, and we hear a lot about, and people thinking that maybe the child in their care has FASD and they don't know where to go. So look, this is a really good, and we've had other guests on who've talked about it, and I think we're learning about it as well ourselves, and we really appreciate this opportunity. I suppose I spoke to you earlier on, Scott, I asked you about hope and fostering, and I just say, look, you guys, you're given hope. It's people, it's foster carers, it's people, passionate people like you who are really giving hope in the system and in these care services. And I really want to thank you. I can't thank you enough. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Any last words or resources that you'd like to share? I know you talked about the conference there, your website maybe, is that something that people can do easily?
I'll do this bit because I'm better at plugging stuff than Tristan.
Thanks,
so listen, what I would like to say is that a lot of our community is made up of foster carers. That's the first thing, and I'm talking about the FASD community. So don't be frightened to pick up the phone to us. Our website obviously is there, FASDIreland.ie. Anybody who's interested in the conference, FASDIreland.ie/conference. And anybody who wants to make that initial contact by the phone can do by ringing our hub, FASD Hub Ireland, which is on 065 670 3098. And yeah, I mean, we're always here in one way or another, whether it's, to pick up the phone, to answer an email or stuff. But, we really understand from our own personal experience of being involved in foster care, and obviously having this on top of it, the FASD Ireland experience as well. So, that's really all I want to say, because foster carers are a massive part of our community here at FASD Ireland, and we want to be able to reach more and support more as well. So
that's brilliant. I think they'll really appreciate that. So thanks on behalf of all of them and ourselves at IFCA. And yeah, we'll definitely be talking again, guys.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Have a good day, and we really appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it was great to talk to Tristan and Scott. A really important discussion, and we are so grateful for the work they're doing. Truly inspiring. A mini masterclass in my view. I hope you enjoyed it too, and don't forget to listen next time. Stories from Foster Care is available at all podcast platforms. Don't forget to subscribe and follow.